Well, if you like to be inspired and challenged and hear how God can transform a church that was ready to close its door, I know you're going to appreciate my next guest. His story was recently made into a movie and released in theaters based on his book, All Saints, the surprising true story of how refugees from Burma brought life to a dying church. And we welcome via Skype Reverend Michael Spurlock. Michael, good to have you on 100 Huntley Street.
Great. Thank you, Greg. Nice to be here.
The first thing I got to ask you, you changed careers. 2007, you go to a place called Smyrna, Tennessee, to close down a church. Why did you take on that kind of assignment?
Well, that was all that was being offered to me when I got out of seminary. My bishop told me that that's where he wanted me to go. And I asked him if, knowing the troubles that the congregation was suffering, I asked if there was another option, and he said, nope.
Well, I guess, and it certainly didn't turn out that way. I don't want to spoil, the book and the movie, but people from Burma show up, also known as Myanmar. How did that happen?
Well, when I got there, we had, when I took up my duties at All Saints, there were about 25 people attending church. We had an $850,000 mortgage on the property, and we thought we were going to have to sell the church and liquidate the debt, and then maybe the thought was to try to replant the church from scratch. And while those wheels were turning to get the property sold, a group of refugees from Burma, who particularly are the Karen people, they're an ethnic minority from Burma, a community of about 65 refugees, showed up at the door one Sunday and said they'd like to attend church with us. How they got here is a long journey from persecution in Burma, fleeing to refugee camps on the Thai border, and then sponsored for relocation by countries such as Canada, the United States, and Australia as political refugees.
Now,
how they wind up in Tennessee, I
who
can't
knows?
tell you what the logic is behind that.
Well,
thank God they did.
One of the other things I do is work with a ministry called the Voice of the Martyrs, and the Korean people, we have, worked with them, and we work actually in that part of the world, and they're very special people. Were there some cultural barriers, though? I mean, rural Tennessee, Burma, I mean, that had to have been a challenge.
It was, it's an interesting mix. Largely conservative, Southern congregation with a group of people none of us had ever heard of. There might have been one or two people who were vaguely familiar with them, but at first I thought they were saying they were from Korea. It took me a while to understand, but they brought me to understanding. And there were cultural differences. The most obvious was the language barrier, and that was the most significant challenge we had. But then also some cultural differences, just from as simple things like, Americans can be kind of huggy. We like to hug, and they don't. And so, we'd sort of misunderstand one another in that respect sometimes. But one of the funnier examples was the fact that the men wore their hats in church, but took their shoes off to receive communion. And then, of course, in the States, you take your hat off, but you leave your shoes on. Yeah. And I had a couple of parishioners, those hats in church really drove them crazy. So we had some growing pains like that, understanding that how do you welcome in another culture whose practices are entirely reverent but different?
Well, like city where we're in here near Toronto, I mean, it's a very, ethnic city. Everybody lives here, but that's a little different in, rural Tennessee. Now, I don't want to spoil, for myself and for others going to see the movie and read the book, but you bought some land, the Lord started to work. But the thing I want to ask you right now, Michael, is how did that affect you, with everything that God did with the people in Tennessee, the people from Burma? How did it grow your church, and what lessons did you learn out of it and also your congregation?
Mm-hmm. Well, the immediate lesson I learned is that being faithful to God and to Jesus' teachings really does have the potential to open up entirely new streams of life in a congregation. We were doing simple, it wasn't rocket science, just simple things. when a stranger comes at your door, this is the Old Testament, do not vex the stranger or the alien who comes to dwell in your midst, but treat them like one of your very own and love them. So we took that and put it into practice. When Jesus says that anyone who comes to you and is hungry, thirsty, naked, homeless, if you assist them, you've assisted me, the Lord says. And if you have neglected them, you've neglected me. So we just took these things very literally, and we're trying to live them out. And then what should have been a church should have been sold and its life ended suddenly began to thrive. Refugees who were in deep need for just basic material circumstances they have a safe place to begin learning how to navigate a new culture, and they have parishioners who are interested in teaching them and helping them, and they begin to thrive. So follow Jesus, and what will you get? You'll get new life, even where everyone else thinks they're supposed to be dead.
Right. Well,
But
Michael,
we know that Christ brings life out of death, right?
He certainly does. Well, for those watching today, you can. It's All Saints is the book, and the movie. John Corbett, actually, who did My Big Fat Greek Wedding, plays you. Maybe we'll have another conversation about what that's like. But again, thank you, Reverend Michael Spurlock, for joining us today.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
And we'll have more of 100 Huntley Street right after this.